When Congress gets back from recess in a few weeks, they will pick up debate on a bill to add a 51st state to the country, Washington, D.C. Last year, the House passed legislation to make the District of Columbia the country's newest state, but the bill was never brought up in the Senate. Now that both chambers are in Democratic control, lawmakers are trying again. If admitted into the Union, D.C. would become the blackest state in the country. Close to half of the 2019 population is African American. Currently, D.C. residents get a non-voting delegate to Congress, but they have no representation in the federal government that makes the city's rules. Stasha Rhodes is the campaign manager for 51 for 51, which seeks to get 51 Senate votes to pass D.C. statehood. Stasha, welcome. It's great to have you with us. So it has been more than 60 years since a state has been admitted to the Union. That makes it kind of hard for many of us to fully conceptualize the actual changes statehood would bring. What impact would it have on people's lives in D.C.?
Thank you for having me and for covering this issue. I think you're right. Look, I think it is difficult for people to sort of conceive the notion of adding a new state to the Union. I also think it sort of has a different level of complexity when you talk about sort of Washington, D.C. Usually people think about D.C., they think of the Capitol and the monuments and the mall, but they don't often think about the over 700,000 residents of Washington, D.C. who are essentially locked out of democracy, who have no senators, who don't have voting representation in the House. And so it means that they're left out of essential debates and votes on things like healthcare and justice and voting rights. And I saw the segment with my friend, Secretary Griswold, talking about the importance of gun violence prevention. Residents of Washington, D.C. have no vote in Congress, have no senators to help protect them from gun violence prevention issues. And so what it would mean is that they actually have a voice and that they can participate in American democracy like all other citizens do.
And, you know, in terms of population, would it become the sort of the least populated state? I mean, I was just looking up a couple of states. North Dakota has about 762,000 people. That's not far off the 700,000 residents in D.C.
No, D.C. actually has a larger population than more than two states, two current states. We have a population of over 712,000 people. I think one of the things that's most important to note is that DC's population of over 700,000 voting residents is 46% Black. If DC is granted statehood, it would be the only state in the nation to have a plurality of Black residents. And for us, that's important. It's important to highlight voting rights in sort of a different context. There's been a lot of conversation about democracy and the importance of the For the People Act. And for us, for the people means all the people, and all the people of Washington, D.C. deserve access to democracy, voting rights in Congress, and to be able to participate in American democracy.
And Stasha, your campaign says there's really only one way to make D.C. the 51st state, get 51 Senate votes. But as you know, because of the filibuster, the bar right now is 60 Senate votes to pass a bill. So is there any way to achieve D.C. statehood with the filibuster intact, or would this require getting rid of the filibuster?
Tanya, we need statehood with 51 votes in the Senate, which means bypassing the filibuster for DC statehood. The filibuster is a Jim Crow relic that has consistently blocked civil rights legislation, including more than 200 anti-lynching bills. We're not going to let arcane Senate rules block what we believe is the most urgent civil rights fight of our lifetime. If 51 votes is good enough for Senator McConnell to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, it should be good enough to enfranchise the residents of Washington, D.C.
You make a very fair point there. Now, of course, as you know, Republicans criticize the push for D.C. statehood as a power grab. According to the State Historical Society of North Dakota, the reason there are 2 Dakotas now is because the Republican Party of the late 1880s simply wanted an extra pair of senators. So over the span of 8 months, the country added 6 new states across the West, giving Republicans 12 new senators. So The precedent is there. Is it necessarily a bad thing to admit D.C. as a state if it is solely for the political gain of one party?
Look, I think that the conversation around power grabbing and adding Democrats to the Senate completely misses the fact that there are people without civil rights in Washington, D.C. And it's been our focus to shine a light on what that means for residents of Washington, D.C. to not have access to Congress. If you live in Louisiana, if you live in Iowa, if you live in California, you have 2 senators to represent your interests. You pay federal taxes. And because of that, you have representation in Congress. Residents of Washington don't have that. I think we've also seen the January 6th insurrection sort of shine a light on what congressional oversight means for places that are not states, like D.C. The mayor of Washington, D.C. wanted to help protect her residents and call in the National Guard. But because she's not a governor, because D.C. is not a state, she had no authority to do so. And so I think we've been able to see in recent time over and over again why it's important for D.C. to have its own autonomy, for it to be a state. And that's why we're fighting. It isn't because we feel like Democrats need 2 extra senators. It's because we believe in democracy and we believe in fair representation.
Stasha Rhodes from the 51 for 51 campaign for D.C. statehood. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.